In this video, we will cover recognizing the available parameter types and working with the available parameter types. When working in Revit, information is key. In order to add information to a building model, it needs to be added to a parameter. There are 4 different types of parameters that you can create and use in Revit: project parameters, family parameters, shared parameters, and global parameters. Let's take a look at each one. Project parameters are specific to a project file. Hence, they're called project parameters. When you create a project parameter, you can assign it to categories of elements. And then the project parameter can be used in schedules, but it cannot be used in tags. Project parameters are great when you need to add a single parameter to both system families and loadable families. Or if you have several loadable families in a project and you need to add a parameter to them without opening the families, then you can add a project parameter and it will be added to all of those components in the project. For example, if you have several lighting fixture families in a project and you need to have a specific parameter in each of those lighting fixtures, then you can add a project parameter. So this is a quick way to add that parameter to all of the lighting fixtures without having to open up each family and adding it as a family parameter. The only downside is that if you need to use that same lighting fixture family in another project, then it won't be available. So you'll either have to create the project parameter in the new project or just add that parameter as a family parameter to each lighting fixture. But once again, project parameters are a great way to quickly add parameters to all of the components in a project. Family parameters are specific to a family. So when you are creating a family, you create family parameters, and they can be used to control family geometry and other variables. The downside to family parameters is that they cannot be used in schedules or tags. But when you create a family parameter, you can actually create it as just a family parameter, or you can create it based on a shared parameter, which we'll get to in just a second. And so there is that ability to create parameters in the family editor and have them be scheduled and tagged. But if you just create it as a family parameter, then those parameters will not be able to be used in schedules or tags. But when you're creating a family, you will typically create several parameters in order to control the geometry and then to add the other variables that you'll need in the family. And so not every single one of those needs to be scheduled and tagged. And so family parameters are still extremely useful when you are developing families. Shared parameters are parameter definitions that can be used in multiple families or projects. And the reason is because they are stored in external text files. So then you can map projects or families to the text file and then be able to essentially pull from those parameter definitions. Shared parameters are very flexible in that they can be used in schedules and tags. And as we've seen with project parameters and family parameters, when you create them, they can be based on a shared parameter. And so that's how shared parameters are used. You either create it as a project parameter or a shared parameter, and then just base it on one of the shared parameter definitions. And then when you're creating tags, you can add shared parameters to the labels, and therefore they can be those parameters can be tagged. So shared parameters are very flexible, and it's important to have a good shared parameter file with all the parameters that you will need in your families and projects. Lastly, we have global parameters. Global parameters are different from the other parameter types in that they are independent of element categories. You can create a global parameter and then use it to drive a dimension or other parameter values. Global parameters can also be used to report values. Global parameters can be extremely flexible and useful in your building models. For example, if you have duplex receptacles placed throughout a building model, each one of them has an elevation from level parameter. That parameter can be associated to a global parameter. And then if you update the global parameter, it will update all of the parameters that are associated to that global parameter. So let's say it changes sometime throughout the project, and instead of having to go back and select each one individually or use window selections or something of that sort, you can just update the global parameter. Or if you have dimensions that are controlling the placement of those duplex receptacles, you can then associate it to the global parameter to that dimension. And then that global parameter will drive those dimensions. So once again, if early on in the design stage where you're trying to figure out the placement, if you have them driven by dimensions, then you can update that global parameter, and it will update it everywhere where that global parameter is used. Just to summarize, in a sense, global parameters are almost like a way of making the project environment similar to the family editor, and global parameters can be very flexible in the design process. So just to summarize, there are project parameters, family parameters, shared parameters, and global parameters.